Good evening. My name is Tom Tartaron, and I'm Executive Director of the Center for the Analysis of Archaeological Materials, or CAM, in the Penn Museum, and Associate Curator in the Mediterranean section. Many thanks to all of you for joining tonight's installment of Archaeology in Action series featuring findings from archaeological projects across the globe. Our next lecture will be on Wednesday, April 2, and will feature Dr. Joseph Wegner, who will discuss the museum's long-running excavations at Abydos under the banner Uncovering the Social and Political History of Ancient Egypt. Now, I'm sure that many of you will have questions tonight, so please just put them in the chat, and Tina will moderate them at the end. So let's meet our speaker. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Marie-Claude Boileau. Dr. Boileau serves as a director and teaching specialist for CAM, a collaborative initiative between the Penn Museum and the University of Pennsylvania School of Arts and Sciences. She also holds the position of adjunct associate professor in the Department of Classical Studies and is a faculty member of the graduate program in Art and Archaeology of the Mediterranean World. Dr. Boileau earned her PhD in archaeology from Université Laval in Canada. Her research centers on reconstructing technological traditions and their evolution over time and space to understand social identity. She employs an integrated methodology that combines contextual, stylistic, and analytical data to trace the choices and actions of ancient potters throughout the production sequence and ultimately to identify communities of practice and the networks they form. Dr. Boileau has participated in archaeological projects in Syria, Iraq, Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, Thailand, and Laos. At CAM, she leads the ceramics laboratory dedicated to the compositional analysis of ceramics and the study of pyrotechnological processes applied to earthen materials. This research spans over 10,000 years of human engagement with the mineral world, aiming to reconstruct production, distribution, and use of ceramics. In addition to her research, Dr. Boileau contributes to the academic community by teaching courses such as Petrography of Cultural Materials and Material World in Archaeological Science. She also mentors students through interdisciplinary research opportunities, exemplified by projects like the analysis of Nubian pottery from the Karanog Cemetery or slipper coffins from Nippur, which offer insights into cultural interactions between ancient empires. Dr. Boileau's work exemplifies the integration of scientific analysis with archaeological inquiry. Let's welcome Dr. Boileau to hear about Southeast Asian ceramics under the lens. Marie-Claude?
Thank you, Tom, for the kind introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Tonight, I will be presenting on a current and still ongoing research on ceramics from Laos. This research falls under the umbrella of the Middle Mekong Archaeological Project, led by Dr. Joyce White, who is the Executive Director of the Institute of Southeast Asian Archaeology, and with the permission and support of the Lao Department of Heritage, Ministry of Information, Culture, and Tourism. So my presentation this evening is roughly composed of three parts. First, I will introduce the broad physical and architectural context of this research. Then I will talk about my work in the field over the course of 3 study seasons and the analysis I am currently undertaking in the ceramics lab in CAM. And I will end my presentation with just a brief discussion of some of the preliminary data. So let's jump right in. If you're not familiar with Laos, let's look at this Google Earth image. Laos, or the Lao People's Democratic Republic, as is also official name, is a landlocked country in mainland Southeast Asia. You can see it here. Vietnam borders it to the east, Cambodia to the south, Thailand to the west and southwest, Myanmar to the northwest, and China to the north. Vientiane is the capital and is located here under the red dot. Looking closer at the country with this topographical map, you can see some of the main physical features of Laos. First, the Mekong, which you see here in blue, which runs through the country and forms part of the western boundary with Thailand. You can also notice that Laos is largely mountainous, characterized by steep terrain and narrow river valleys. You can see the Annamese Range forming most of the eastern border with Vietnam, and the Luang Prabang Range in the northwest, which borders with the Thai highlands. This mountainous landscape extends across most of the country's north, except for the lowland areas along the Mekong River, as well as the plain of Vientiane, and where the capital is located, and the plain of Jars in the Luang province. The research that I'm sharing tonight with you is concentrated in the north-central part of Laos, in the Luang Prabang province, which you can see highlighted here. In 2001, Dr. Joyce White from the Penn Museum undertook a quick assessment survey with the Lao Department of Museum and Archaeology. This area of Laos, people knew that this was actually has a prehistoric evidence of occupation. However, no real excavations or survey had been conducted. So in 2001, in just a few days, looking at a very small geographic area, Dr. Weiss and her colleagues were able to see the artifactual evidence for over 10,000 years of human occupation. You can see here some of the ceramic material that was recovered in 2001 with some of the earliest ceramics of the area here on the left, and some of the historical glazed and unglazed stoneware of the historical periods. This survey or this assessment led Dr. White to conceive the Middle Mekong Archaeological Project, or MMAP, as I will refer to in the next slides, which is a collaborative research program of international scholars. It includes surveys, excavations for 4 cave sites in the area. I just want to show you here. This is not the most recent map of the survey, but it really shows you well the topography of the area. First off, you have the Mekong River with the Luang Prabang, the 5 tributary rivers that we'll mention tonight. You see here the U River, the Soang River, the Pa, the Kan, and the Dong. And over 100 sites have been surveyed. And the 4 excavated sites are Tam Soa, which is located here, Tam Vang Talau, TVTL, excavated in 2008 here, Upakau Rock Shelter on the Kan River, and on the Dong River, not located, which is not labeled here, but this is Tamanma, which was excavated in 2010. The rich ceramic data set of over 3,000 fragments and several whole vessels recovered by MMAP really provides a foundational collection from which scientific analyses can begin to piece together the economic and technological dimensions of past societies of these important regions. So just over 20 years after the first assessment of the area, I was invited by Dr. White to start the research on the ceramic material. I'm grouping my really broad research questions for this material here. I am interested in learning about the technological and diachronic changes in ceramic technology within and across the 5 tributary rivers. I'm also curious to see or if I'm able to identify movement or exchange of ceramic objects within the survey area, and also provide a better understanding of earthenware and stoneware production into proto-historical and historical period. Before jumping to the core of my research, I want to mention 3 aspects of the broader project that have significantly shaped the way that I'm framing the analysis of the materials, and also the way that I'm going to interpret the data. First off, this is a long-term perspective of ceramic traditions from the Middle Holocene to the historical period. As archaeology in Laos is still in its infancy, these are the rough estimates of the main periods of human activity in the area. So we'll be making references to some of these periods throughout my talk. Ceramics start to appear in the region in the Middle Holocene and continue to be made in use until today. Second, the physical features of the mountainous terrain in the Mekong have shaped the human-environment interactions regarding the flow of people, materials, and objects. This riverscape, as I like to call it, plays an important role in terms of mobility and transport, access to resources, and with the monsoon cycle, the annual depositing of fertile soils along the riverbanks. For potting communities, my interest of research, rivers and their banks provide raw material resources essential to the craft. For example, alluvium sediments, including clay, silt, and sand, and also a natural corridor to transport and exchange commodities. It is also on the banks of the Mekong that the large historical kiln sites were located in the later centuries of my interest. Thirdly, the majority of the ceramic artifacts collected and excavated at MMAP come from cave and rock shelters. Like, while artifacts were found in most of these rock shelters and cave sites in the area, it's important to remember that even at the best of times, people likely spent only a small portion of their daily lives there. These sites were used over time for different purposes. For example, as temporary campsites, for seasonal activities, for protection from the elements, animals, or people, and for burial grounds. Therefore, the ceramic material that I'm studying does not come from settlements and represent the different uses of these shelters over time. I would also like to point out the challenges of integrating the stratigraphy at these sites, not only because of the overlap of different activities through time, but also because there are complex diagenetic processes in this environment and also extensive bioturbation. So let me talk about my approach to ceramic analysis. So ceramic artifacts retain a lot of information about how they were made, and it is up to me as a ceramic specialist and archaeologist to tease out their meaning. This technological approach to ceramic analysis looks at all the stages of manufacturing, from the raw materials and their preparation to the forming, finishing techniques, and the firing practices. We call this approach a chain operatoire or production sequence. And it allows me to see individual makers, the potters, by their different choices and actions within the socially accepted and reproduced ways of making a particular pot. There's also variability in local learning networks and transmissions of skills. The ceramic artifacts that I study not only reflect a shared heritage, a tradition, but also the skills and know-how of individual potters. So just briefly here, you see the main steps of the production sequence, how the raw materials were acquired and prepared. So we are obviously thinking about clays. So we can be mixing clays, but also the addition of inclusions, which we call temper, or the removal of coarser inclusions. So these materials when we study these raw materials, it really links to the location of production of these ceramics. Forming techniques, we're thinking about hand making and wheel making, but often it's a combination of multiple techniques. These are learned skills. And the raw materials and the forming techniques are actually a part of the potter's craft that is not easily transferable unless you have direct contact with the potters. The surface treatments and decorations can be really varied, and these touch upon the broader social groups of the consumers of these materials, so that they're glazed, painted, incised, or very simply just smooth. There's a lot of ways to finish these objects. And then firing, right? Ceramics is a pyrotechnology, the earliest pyrotechnology to be invented. This is really important. This is where everything can go wrong, but it is really the crucial part of transforming a clay into a ceramic. So we need temperatures of at least 500 degrees Celsius, long enough time to transform the clay. So people in the past were really using different strategies to fire their objects, from open firing to kilns, which can be very simple or very complex. So these are all really important aspects of the production sequence. So how do we figure out these steps when working with sherds or whole pots? The study of past technological processes is somewhat akin to what I call reverse engineering. This is a process that moves backward, closely examining an existing product to understand how it was made. So let's look at this pot, right? So from my point of view, we're looking at beautiful, a large jar, well decorated, but to know really how this object was made, we really need to look at some of the details. There's a few things, a few features that we can glimpse from the surface analysis. Let me just take you through some of these. We see the decoration, right? So this is really important. In this case, it really covers the entirety of the surface. And sometimes the really well decorated and finished objects obliterate all of the traces that are left from the forming techniques. In this case, however, underneath this beautiful comb incised linear and wavy bands and applique bands, which we applied decoration. Let me just use my pointer here so you can see. So these are the applique bands and the comb incised decoration. You can see some of the impressions left by a quarterback paddle that was used to shape the pot and also texture the surface. You can see here some of these impressions. You can also see some tool marks, which I think are tool marks and not decoration, maybe left by the side of the paddle that was used to finish the pot. What you also notice maybe are those black spots. These are called fire clouds. And this is what happens when the fuel is touching the pot surface. In this case, this tells us that this object was fired in an open firing setting. But this is still very limited information. I'm still not getting into the technological aspect of how this pot was made. So to dig deeper, I use a series of techniques which is looking at the materials at multiple scales of analysis. So these techniques will provide different but complementary data on the composition and structure of the samples. For example, if I'm interested in forming techniques, I might be using X-ray radiography, right? We're looking at the structure of the object, also surface feature analysis, what is left on the surface on the interior and exterior surfaces of these objects. If I want to know more about the composition, so the raw materials that were used, we have a number of techniques, petrographic analysis, which will look at the mineralogical composition, or chemical analyses, looking at the elements that compose the ceramics. We also use a range of microscopes, including high power microscope, including an SEM, like this one here, which allows me to see some of the microstructure of ceramics. In this case, I'm looking at the vitrification pattern of a high fired ceramics, how the clay particles were melting and densifying the body. Part of my work also involves a lot of experimental analysis. So working with clays collected around the site to understand what type of clays are available to the potters, but also bringing them to the lab, making these they look like tablets, but they're like test tiles that we make, and we fire at different temperatures to see how the clays transform at different temperatures. This also gives me a reference group to understand firing practices. And then finally, also, whenever possible, using ethnoarchaeology, so the study of traditional craftsmen in an area that we work. And I'm really lucky that in Southeast Asia, there's still a lot of traditional potters. This is a potter from Northeast Thailand, and she is beating a pot into shape using an anvil that she's holding in this hand here. This is a clay anvil, ceramic anvil that is positioned inside the pot, and she's beating the exterior with a paddle. This is a wooden paddle. So ethnoarchaeology allows us to see the whole process, see the tools that were used, often made in organic materials. So we actually lose this in the actual record, and we see those features. So it's a really good understanding of how these objects were made. So this is a beating technique with a paddle anvil. And this is the same technique that was used to shape the pot that I showed you in the previous slide. So all of these techniques, as I said, they give us complementary data. And the choice of these analytic technique, it really depends on the type of research question and also the type of ceramic that I am studying. Just for example, I've used the word earthenware and stoneware, and I just want to define them a little bit more, because these ceramics have different material properties, which are linked to different organization of production, and also the techniques that we use to study them will also differ. So earthenware, where these are the low fired ceramics, they have a fairly high porosity from between 10 to 25% pores, and the firing range is really wide, but mostly below 1,000 degrees Celsius. So anywhere between 600 and 1,000 degrees Celsius. The high fire ceramics are the stoneware and the porcelain. You can see how the porosity is much lower, almost to no porosity at all, and the firing range is really high. So these ceramics require clays that we call refractory clays that can sustain really high firing temperature, that can vitrify but not melt completely. So these really require different structures, like high fire ceramics require kilns to be able to sustain these high temperatures. And also the skills in the preparation of the clay base are very different. These are made, so earthenware were made for a very long time, and the stoneware and the porcelains were made more recently. They have these vitrified dense body are used for objects that have different functions. For example, these are all from the Luang Prabang area. These large stoneware jars are used here for the fermentation of rice for alcohol. In this case, it's rice whiskey. And this earthenware pot here is used for cooking pots. So the different material properties make these objects really functional for different uses. All right, let me take you through the field. So this is what we call a study season. So we are in the region in Luang Prabang, and this is post-excavation and survey. So this is when we start looking at the material, spending more time doing research on it to answer our questions and work towards a publication. So we are most grateful that our workspace for the last 2 study seasons is located on the grounds of the National Museum of Luang Prabang, which you see here, which was a former royal palace. This is the part of the museum, and you have Mount Fusi here at the back. If you've been to Luang Prabang, you know where this is located. So we are using a number of storage rooms on one of the outbuildings of on the grounds of the museum. We are a fabulous team of eight people, and we've been working together for the past 2 seasons. And we're using the suite of rooms here, which allow us to work inside in a covered space, working on database entry and technical drawings. We also have a space for storing all of this material, and also outdoor space where you see me there working with the material where I need natural light. So I like to work outside, but this is a really hot environment. So I am covered, it's a shaded area, so which is perfect here for the work. So we have our co-directors, Joyce and Julia, which you see here, working with Naho, another specialist of ceramics. We have a great team of illustrators who are working on all of the technical drawings that we need, that I need for my research. Gong Kao here is our collections manager, and she's organizing all of the movement of the material from these different spaces. And I work mainly on the earthenware. So this is my my workspace. So this is where I do all of the macroscopic analysis, which we can do in a museum or here in the field. So I'm measuring, I am describing the decoration, I'm color coding the surfaces and the cross sections. I'm using a handheld lens to look at the inclusions that they can see in the cross section. And I'm also selecting the samples that I want to do further work on. These sherds also fully photographed. These are co-director Suya, who's photographing all of the sherds that will be used for publication and future research. This is an example of the technical drawing that is made. So again, we are working on more than 3,000 sherds, so it's a lot of work. We work 7 days a week for 3 to 4 weeks during that season. So we are a very efficient team. I also collect all of the information that I need about the forming techniques, as I'm interested in technology. You can see here an object that is really nicely decorated, and you see on the inside how you have all the paddle impressions. Not the paddle, I'm sorry, the anvil impressions on the interior. They're very deep, and this tells me that the potter was using a very wet plastic clay when it was actually shaped. So with this study season, this is just want to show you some close-up images of the beautiful earthenware ceramics. Even though these are low-fire ceramics, they're really, really nicely made. We have a range of open and closed shapes. You see some of the cord marking from the beading technique, a beautiful decoration using combs. We have applique bands, really a range of techniques that we see throughout the tributary rivers and across the periods. We also have a lot of this type of surfaces. It's a reflective surface. It's called burnishing. And the potters will actually use river pebbles to roughly polish the surface. And we see this quite a bit for the Iron period ceramics on both the inside and the outside of the surfaces. So this is really the remarkable collection that I'm studying at the moment. This is a bit in contrast to also the stoneware and trade ceramics that are found at the site in much lower quantity than the earthenware. These are high-fire historical ceramics, and these are studied by my colleague Naho Shimizu, who is an expert on trade ceramics. including stoneware and porcelain, which were extensively traded between centers in mainland Southeast Asia. The Lao stoneware, so the locally produced stonewares, it's much less understood. And I will come back to this point a little bit later. I just want to show you here, so mostly for the Lao stoneware, mostly jars, fairly large jars, but also other types of objects. This is a fishnet weight, right? So we are on the riverbanks, and the river system is really important. So fishnets weights are actually something that we see a lot in the survey. And also this is a lamp. We have also pipes which are made of stoneware. All right. So these study season, the focus of these study seasons is also to select samples for future laboratory analysis. So I selected over the course of the 3 study season, I selected about 90 samples, which are representative of the 3 tributary rivers, the fortress excavations, also the survey sites, and represents all of the main ceramic wares. I've been able to collect samples, analyze them, go back the following year, and refine my sampling strategy to make sure that I cover all of the main wares. So all of the material remains in Laos, and the permission to sample and export for laboratory analysis in the US was given by the Lao Department of Heritage. And here I would like to really say thank you to the co-director, Stulia, who has been really supportive in helping with all of the paperwork that is required to these permission. Before we jump into the lab or what I do here in CAM, I just want to talk about some field visit that we were able to do while we were in the field. So one of the advantages of working in Luang Prabang, and there are many advantages of working there, the people, the food, the beautiful landscape, is also being able to visit potters who are still producing earthenware and stoneware using traditional methods. So this is the historic pottery village of Banjang, which is located very close to Luang Prabang, just downstream, but on the other, across the Mekong River. Potters here, the village is, I think 7 or 9 potting families were working here together. Each they have their space, and they're usually working as a team. So we have the potter, which you see here. I'm just going to start the video so you can see him working, who is assisted here in this occasion by his daughter. So she is preparing coils, so clay coils, which are like clay snakes, which you see piled up here, and you see the potter who's using them. So he's actually building up the shape. And do notice the way that he's actually moving the wheel with his foot, which is really, I had never seen this before. And as the pot gets higher, so bigger, she will be assisting him in spinning the wheel so he can use more effectively his 2 hands. So this is really remarkable. So you can see the whole setup of these, of the potters. And also we were able to see how they were preparing clay. So the clay is mined close by, that is shared with the other potting families. You can see here that the traditional way of mixing the raw materials, she is stepping, kneading the clay with her feet, and inclusion that she's adding. So the temper is actually dry clay. So she's preparing these before she is able to shape the coil. So these are wheel coiled objects. This is the communal kiln that is used at this village, which actually has been in use for over 300 years, which is really remarkable. It's a traditional in-ground kiln. It's about 7 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 1 meter high. There's a cross-section here of a similar in-ground kiln, just to give you a sense. The opening is here, and the only part of the kiln that you can see above ground is the chimney here. We were lucky enough that I visited the site, the village twice. But this past December, there was actually one of the potting family was doing a firing, so they were stoking the kiln. So we were able to talk to the potter and learn a little bit more about the whole process. In this case, they're stoking the kiln for two days, and when they reach a temperature of about 1,000 degrees, they seal the opening with clay and bricks. And they leave it like this for 2 days. And after a couple of days, they actually remove the opening to let the air in. And they wait another 2-3 days for the kiln to cool off. And then they actually retrieve the objects. So over a period of a week, you have the whole process of ramping the temperature, soaking the temperature for as long as possible, and then cooling period, which is what we expect for these big kilns and these well-fired ceramics. I also want to just show you here the wasters that we found that were actually near the kiln site. So as archaeologists, sometimes we don't find kilns, we don't find workshops. So what we do find are these heaps of wasters. This is really the debris from what went wrong during the firing. So everything in the firing that was cracked, warped, or on fire, or not well fired, or actually just thrown away around the site. So this creates a lot of shards and broken fragments. It was interesting to see this, and Potter was telling us that about 25 to 30% of the firing event of the objects in the kiln were actually lost during one firing event. And each kiln event would hold about 300 small jars and 70 large jars. So it was just really interesting to see all of this process, talk to the potters, learn about the tools that they were using, where they're acquiring their materials. So a really rich experience for those of us who are interested in ceramic analysis. All right, so let me jump into the laboratory work. So I've got the permission to take the samples. They're brought here to the Center for the Analysis of Archaeological Material. And I am spending a lot of time right now analyzing these samples. So because I'm looking essentially at earthenware, so these low-fire ceramics, the choice technique is ceramic petrography, which is a compositional analysis technique which draws on the scientific study of rocks and sediments under the microscope. This is used to characterize these ceramics in terms of minerals and other inclusions, as well as their ground masses. I'm using a polarizing light microscope, which you see here, which is transmitted light. So light goes through when I hold in the stage, and through the sample and up into the objectives. And the way that we prepare the samples are called thin sections. So we use a very thin slice of ceramic, actually 30 microns thick, which is mounted on a glass slide. We need exactly that thickness in that type of microscope so that when we put the sample under the light path, we can actually identify the rocks and the minerals based on the optical properties. You can see this, what it looks like. This is what I see every day, and this is what I teach as well. It's a beautiful world. This is what a ceramic thin section looks like. So this is a microphotograph at about 100 times magnification. So I studied the whole field of view that you see here. So just pointing how, so rock and mineral inclusions, which you see here, the fired clay ground mass, as well as the porosity. So I characterize these elements of the fabric, which I call the petrofabric, and I can interpret the data from the point of view of technology. So I'm looking at evidence for clay mixing, tempering traditions. So what inclusions might be naturally present in the clay face, or those that might have been added by the potters, and also the firing, looking at the optical properties of the clay ground mass. It allows me to think about these are a range of temperatures which were used in the past. I'm also thinking about the location of production. So petrography is a very powerful technique for provenance. I often say that petrography is like fingerprinting the pots. So I will match the mineralogy of the ceramic as I see it here under the microscope with the local geological landscape. So I'm comparing the data from the superficial geology on an area. So this is a very large scale geological map. Just to show you a little bit. So you have the area here in the box of where I'm working. So all of the different colors are charting different rock formation, which are outcropping on the surface. To this geological map, I will also layer a topographical map to understand, obviously, the mountainous terrain in this area, and as well the flow of the rivers. So I've chose to show you this large scale map just so you can see, even though I'm working in this area here, and this color means I'm working with sedimentary sediments and rocks. I want to show you the river and the river system. So the headwaters are coming like the U River here. So I'm looking at these alluvium sediments, which are deposited by the river in the area, but really reflect the geological outcrops constantly being eroded by the flow of the water. So each tributary system should have its own mineralogic makeup, obviously unless the rivers carve out the same type of rock. So you can see here also the Kan River, which is coming here, going through different outcrops are igneous and metamorphic and sedimentary rocks and so on. So this is really how I do part of my work, working with the geological landscape. All right, let me give you an overview of the preliminary data. This analysis is very much ongoing, so really consider the next few slides as a teaser to what's to come in the future. I chose only 3 main areas of research, just presenting a little bit of data, but really where the research will move forward in the future. And each of these 3 main areas is centered around a specific site. So the first aspect of research I want to talk is the early earthenware. And to do this, we'll be looking at the site of Tanvang Talau, or TBTL, which is located here on the Pa River. So this site was occupied by hunter-gatherers, as evident by the abundant lithic artifacts which were found during the excavation. This lithic technology belongs to the Hoabinian group who are using river cobbles for flicking stone tools. Near the surface, but still excavated, very few sherds were found, and these are what they look like. So really, you can see from the grid paper, very, very small sherds. Some diagnostic sherds, we call diagnostic sherds fragments that give us a sense of the whole shape. So rim fragments or base fragments in this case. Here at the top, you have the rim fragments, but all the rest are really tiny little sherds. So less than 100 pieces were found at the site. Most of them, however, show evidence of core marking, a little bit of incising, and also burnishing treatments on the surfaces. This type of ceramic in its context appears to be the oldest of the 4 sites excavated by MMAP. And from the point of view of petrography, it's been really fascinating. So petrographic analysis for the sherds of TBTL show a remarkable variability, or variety, I should say, of petrofabrics. Each is distinct by its own type of mineral inclusions. This was actually something that I haven't seen in the rest of the material. So all the samples show a poorly sorted inclusions. You see here very large inclusions set in the fine clay ground mass. So all of them were taking the same magnification. They show very, very low firing and high porosity. And again, no other site that I've seen on the survey has this variability of the ways that the clay materials were selected and prepared. Just to give you some example on this here, on the left, we have this petrofabric, and we see those really big angular pieces. It's actually a crushed carbonate rock, and the inclusions of calcite, which you see here, were added as an inclusion. So here the potter was intentionally adding inclusion to the clay paste. The other microphotographs you see here, so different again, coarse grain, poorly sorted inclusions, but these are really rounded inclusions, which you see here. So these are probably either coarse sand that was selected along the riverbank, or naturally coarse clays, and they reflect different type of rocks. In this case, we have volcanic rocks, and here sedimentary rocks. So this tradition here is really ad hoc. It seems that potter, maybe different potters were making these ceramics, or they were really made in low quantities for whatever function they needed these objects to have. This type of clay preparation and firing is also allowed me to confirm the presence of other early ceramics in the survey. And you can see some of these here. Maybe perhaps the biggest takeaway is that these ceramics are from the Middle Holocene and were therefore made by hunter-gatherers. So often ceramic technology is associated with agricultural and sedentary societies, but these early ceramics in Luang Prabang tie in well with the research on late Pleistocene, early Holocene ceramics from other regions in the world, where the earliest ceramic objects are associated with hunter-gatherers. So the use of these ceramics, or even why ceramic was invented and these early period, is a fascinating topic, but is one actually for another lecture. I don't have the time to get more into this, but if you're curious, we can maybe talk about it in the Q&A session. I want to contrast this early ceramic with the bulk of my analysis, which is mostly on the Iron period petrofabrics for all of the survey area. And this is what these look like under the microscope. They are different in a way that these are more highly fired, they have less porosity, and they show a very clear sorting of the sand tamper that was used. It's actually remarkable that even though each tributary shows different styles of decoration, the use of the same clay paste preparation, forming techniques, and firing practices tell us about the sharing and transfer of technological knowledge between the potters in this area. So this is really what I'm working on right now in Dalam. So I'll be happy to talk about this more in the future. Okay, so another aspect of the research that I want to talk about is about the craftsmanship and skills needed to produce earthenware. So this rock shelter site is named Taman Ma and is located on the Dong River, which you see here in the blue dot, and was excavated by MMAP in 2010. So you see here the beautiful rock shelter and the excavation units within at the site. The excavators found nearly intact jars used for multiple secondary burial very near the surface. You can see the jars here, very large jar. You can see by the stick here how big it is. And I also want to note the circular stone slab that is here. And once it was removed and excavated, there's other fragments of another large jar right underneath it. So as such, Taman Ma is one of several known probable Iron Age sites with buried jars or jar burials and or stone jar sites in the Middle Mekong region. The most famous of these is in the area are those of the Plain of Jars in the An province, where open air stone jar sites and other megalithic sites are located. What is interesting here is that latest scientific dates from our project, but also from scholars working in the Plain of Jars, seem to indicate that the mortuary activity around the jars took place not during the Iron period, as is previously believed, but in the late proto-historical period. And this is really interesting, as it really pushes the production of these burial jars closer to the stoneware production that we know in the area. But what I really want to focus about these jars is I want to emphasize the exceptional craftsmanship that was used in their production. It's often a misconception that earthenware were only utilitarian, as some were only utilitarian uses. Many of them actually had symbolic or ritual value, especially jars as these ones, which were used for burials. So earthenware, yes, but the skills to make these large jars is unparalleled among all of the other MMAP ceramics I've had the chance to study. The process of making these jars would have been very time-consuming and required skilled potters, essentially because of their size. So the time investment here is very likely related to their use in the burial rituals. I just want to show you just quickly here. You see that the whole surface is entirely decorated in different sections, including the base. And here the pattern of the decoration changes, is radiating towards the tip of the base, which we're missing. These were very thick jars, so the firing of these jars would have been tricky, and they were actually fired in open fire. You see here by the fire clouds. The interior of the jar is fully black, which I think it's actually not a slip or not a paint. It's probably they were fired upside down, so that the interior of the jars was in a reducing environment, keeping the surface completely black. These jars were handmade by a coiling and beading technique. I can say this because on this base, you can see the circular slab that was used for the base. And you see the breakage pattern here, which tells us that these are the large cores which were used to build up the shape. The breakage patterns of these of objects are interesting because they are going to ceramic parts are going to break along the weaknesses of the structure. So this is actually a good indication of how they were actually put together. So coiled and finished with a beading technique. So we have all of the impression, the core mark impression on the surface, but also some of the paddle marks, which are seen on the interior of the neck of the jars. Just to show you a bit more of these, two of the other jars which were found at Taman Ma, with the one here that I used to talk to you about reverse engineering. And another one that is also made exactly the same way, but the style and the shape is a little bit different, just so that you can appreciate the skills required for their production. Finally, the last set of research questions that I want to talk about, it usually opens up to our future research, is this year about Stoneware Kiln Center. So one of the sites surveyed by MMAP is Ban Shanghai, a historical kiln site located on the bank of the Mekong River, upstream from Luang Prabang and near the mouth of the U River. Excavation in 1980s by another group of researchers exposed 2 in-ground kilns and confirmed the location of at least 20 other kilns. So these kilns are very similar to the one that I showed you at the potting village of Banjang. However, these were built directly on the riverbank, so really good access to the river for for the exchange of the finished objects, but also for access to all of these products. So we were so in 2023, during our study season in December, we visited the site just to confirm the location of the previous excavation and also appreciate the very large, you can see here, a dump site. So these are all the wasters from this important production center. This waster here, they're all located here along the bank, and they actually continue under the water. This is because the water of the Mekong is a bit higher now with the damming of the river, but these really would extend it much further in the river. So we have a lot of these objects here. We do, again, all wasters, a lot of fragmentary, but also complete objects. And kiln, what we call kiln furniture. This is a kiln spacer, a triangular shaped stoneware piece, which would be put to separate the different objects, right? So if they were high fired and glazed, you need to make sure that there's separation between the object as they're stacked in the kiln so that they don't fuse together. And I just want to highlight one of the bases of these stoneware jars, which is like you see the straight marks from the removal from the wheel. And this is a feature that is unique to Lao stoneware. So as I mentioned, the trade ceramics are well studied in Southeast Asia with the known kilns and trade routes. And their presence in the Luang Prabang region highlights the connections with the broader region from the 12th through the 19th century CE. However, the local and regional production of unglazed and glazed stoneware is still poorly understood. So the location of a known kiln center within the MMAP survey was a great opportunity for us to build up a new research questions and a set of analyses. So really to establish the local geochemical signatures for these unglazed and glazed stonewares, to confirm if these stonewares were actually produced at the Ban Shanghai kilns or maybe at other kilns that are also found in the region. And we also want to confirm some of the stoneware imports that we know from their style and their color of the glazes by matching the geochemical data to known kiln complexes elsewhere in mainland Southeast Asia. You can see me here sampling one of those trade ceramics, which are maybe coming from Thailand on Myanmar. You can see here as well as some arranged. When we actually pull out all of those stoneware samples, we saw a lot of variability, a lot more than what we expected. Some of them seem to be a bit lower fired, different colors, firing color as well. So there's a lot here to be said about analyzing stoneware products. I also want just to mention that we are using a different compositional technique, in this case, elemental analysis, because these are high fired vitrified clay bodies. And this part of the work I'm doing in collaboration with my colleague, Dr. James Davenport of the Archaeology Laboratory at the University of Missouri Research Reactor. So prior to this research, the ceramics of Luang Prabang have never been analyzed. Therefore, the result of this project will offer a much needed baseline for research on Lao earthenware and stoneware produced, exchanged, and used across the 5 tributary rivers. The data will contribute to our understanding of the Middle Mekong riverscapes connectivity from the Middle Holocene to the historical periods. This is a long durée perspective on ceramic traditions in a dynamic riverscape. I just want to, this is collaborative work, and I just want to mention the support of different institutions. So the Institute for Southeast Asian Archaeology, the Penn Museum, the American Philosophical Society, and the Archaeology Laboratory. I will be happy to take questions about my work as a ceramic expert. But if you have broad questions about Southeast Asian archaeology or the context, excavation context, please keep your questions for Dr. Joyce White. She will be presenting in this series on June 4th on her pioneer research in Thailand and Laos. I also just want to end on this final beautiful slide because it's a beautiful landscape there. I want to talk about we are CAM is celebrating its 10-year anniversary this year, so we were very pleased with what we have accomplished. And you heard my colleagues in this series this past year, and the year before talk about their research. But we would like to invite you to come to our end of year student showcase, which will happen on Friday, April 18th from 2 to 5 p.m. in the Penn Museum's Warner Auditorium. You will hear about the original work that our undergrad and graduate students are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie-Claude. That was so much information. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will go ahead and get them answered. So, Anonymous would like to know what are types of inclusions and what are their purposes? What are types of inclusions and what are their purposes as used by potters?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we find a lot of different types of inclusions in ceramics. Most of them are mineral or rock fragments. So these are coming from sand or crushed rock that we find. Is also organic inclusions that we can find. When I use the word inclusions because until we actually do analysis, we don't know if these inclusions were naturally occurring in the clays, so maybe coarse clays, or if they were intentionally added by the potters. So when they are intentionally added, we call these tempers. And there's a range of reasons why they could be added. So sometimes mixing clays or adding inclusions will help the workability of the clay paste. For example, if you were making a large jars, just like the ones I showed, the burial jars, these are really big objects. And as you actually shape them, the weight of the walls might collapse. So if you want to increase the strength of the plastic layer, you can actually add a temper. So this is really adding the strength and helping the potters actually work on work with their raw materials. Tempers also have a different function in the performance of the fired objects. So if, for example, if you're making a cooking pot, you want to make sure that the cooking pot will rapidly transfer the heat from the hearth to the content. So you want actually a thin wall to be able to do this. But at the same time, you want a ceramic that can sustain the mechanical and thermal stress of cooking over fire. So by adding like a rock inclusions that you're adding to the clay, this will help again the cooking pot to sustain all of the mechanical and thermal stresses. If you add organic temper, which if you think about it, you add a lot of organic temper for the workability of the clay paste, it stiffens the clay right away. So if you have a clay paste that is too wet, too plastic to work with, if you add organic temper, the organic temper is going to absorb all of the moisture. So that it stiffens the clay right away, which is interesting. And we know that potters were using all of the leftover from the agricultural practices. So in the work that I do in northeastern Thailand, potters were using rice husk to temper their ceramics. What is interesting is that the organic tempers burn out during the firing. So if the firing is too low or too short, we can still see evidence of this organic temper. But if it's fired well enough, it's going to completely burn out. It's going to leave a very porous body. So this is maybe something that you want for. So it's going to be a more insulating body. It also is perfect if you want to, for example, make a jar to actually keep the water cool in a hot environment. So having this a lot of porosity will allow the water to stay cool. So there's a lot of ways that potters were actually manipulating the raw materials for workability and performance. And then maybe the last thing that I can add to this is if you are using a fast wheel, you want to do the reverse, right? You want to use the finest clay possible or remove the coarse inclusions because it would be very difficult to use a fast wheel with a very coarse clay.
Interesting. Is there anything distinctive about the the fragments from Laos as opposed to fragments from neighboring countries like Vietnam?
Yes, they will be different because there's different traditions from different areas, so they will be different in all aspects. So there's still sometimes the broad similarities between this area and the use of the beading technique, or the use of linear decoration using a combing decoration. But if we look at the whole production sequence, we see a lot of differences. So yes, usually we see differences for the technology and also the style.
Excellent, thank you. What is the significance historically of the different decorations among potters of different tributaries?
The significance of it, these are decorated for the way that the pots are used. So it's really part about the social function of these pots, and it can be, again, as I mentioned, these burial jars were heavily decorated, so we can think that these being part of the funeral ritual was really important here. So have these jars. It's hard to know at this point. There's no habitation or settlement sites that we've excavated, but there's many reasons why we would have highly decorated ceramics.
Yeah, so I mean, similar question then. Do you know what drove the trade of ceramics in prehistoric or Bronze Age eras? Was it the functionality, the beauty?
So I don't see trade right now so much. So in these early periods, and again, this is because I'm working on material that is coming from these cave sites. I'm looking at different activities, but not settlements. But trade, of these objects, yes, people are moving around our landscape, so they will move with objects. And not everyone is a potter or making these pots, so that's also part of the trade. So there's also, again, different reasons why we might see ceramic objects, even in the early periods, being moved around. But it's not necessarily trade, it could be just movement of people as well.
All right, and then we have one final question for the night. Do you know, were the potters controlling the oxidation state, reducing or oxidizing the atmosphere during the firing process?
Yes, they are. So the different type of firing atmospheres that it's oxidizing or reducing is important. So it's easier to control when you're using a kiln, that's for sure. Because then you can close up or open up the kiln, add fuel, or add the flow of air within the kiln. And by controlling the firing atmosphere, you also control the not only the vitrification of the ceramics, but also the color that the ceramics will have. So color plays a big role in how pots are seen and used. So in the oxidizing atmospheres in this area, we see really red or brownish pots. In a reducing area, you can have really black pots. So yeah, they're able to control it, but also with bonfires, right? Bonfires, because the pots are in contact with the fuel, so the fuel completely covers the object. So the start of the firing is always in a reducing atmosphere, and then as the fuel burns out, it finishes in a more oxidizing atmosphere. So if you want to keep the pots and have them more reduced, you can actually add more moisture to the fuel, or you can build cover with maybe broken fragment of ceramic. So there's different ways to control these firing atmosphere, and it's really important for potters. So they definitely were skilled, regardless if they were using open firing or kiln structures.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Marie-Claude, for sharing your wonderful work with us. Thank you for everyone who attended. Great. Tom says it was fascinating talk as well. We look forward to seeing you next month, as Tom alluded to, with Dr. Joseph Wagner on his work at Abydos in Egypt.